Zmira, would you like to start?
Yes, I will. Welcome, everyone. Very good of you to be here at this time. It's not easy at 7 o'clock in the evening. I'm a mom myself, so I know it's not always a very convenient time to leave everything and tune in. So I hope we can be of help here and that you can leave with some good ideas of how you can help your teens with some of the stresses and worries that they're experiencing. So I'm going to start right away. Everyone experiences stress from time to time, and it's definitely normal for kids and even teens and even adults to have worries and various fears as they grow older. This is normal because we all experience feelings of threat, of challenge, of unknown that creates those, particularly in young kids. Kids sometimes have fears when they're very young, and they tend to be transient, they tend to be temporary. For example, a child who is afraid of thunderstorm may eventually grow out of it as they learn that through experience that a thunderstorm is not really a threat to them and won't be that harmful for them in most cases. So when we think of the kind of fears and worries that children have, we do kind of see that as a normal part of development. And kids learn as time goes by to deal with some of these worries and some of these fears. When we're thinking about teens, the type of fears and worries that teens may have are usually around things that are related to social and evaluative situations. So these are things like, what is the peer group going to think of me? Will I be teased? Will I be made fun of? Taking oral tests, oral presentation, taking tests in school, and other things like even death and injury. These are quite common for teens and sometimes preteens as well. Next slide, please. So the big question is, how do I know if my child needs help and with their anxiety? So the way we look at anxiety is that an anxiety maybe is a kind of a fear or worry that is sort of not necessarily related to an actual situation that is happening. It could be in our mind, so in the child's mind. We are human beings with very good imagination, and the what if or what will happen in the anticipation of something and the thought that something will be threatening and will be harmful sometimes creates more anxiety than the actual situation. When we look at anxiety, we look at it more in a continuum. So on one end, we have mild anxiety that most of us are feeling at least a little bit at this time. And as we go on through the continuum, we get to the level where a child is feeling severe anxiety, and that is manifested in various ways. What do we mean by severe anxiety? So we look at different areas. One is that it's interfering in everyday life. This is a really important point. When we're having mild anxiety and we're feeling that we're a bit stressed, a bit worried about something, but we continue with our lives, we continue to be able to function in the type of things that we need to do, depending on our developmental level, that means the anxiety is manageable. It's when it becomes severe and unmanageable and interfering with our lives that we begin to wonder if we need help or if the child needs help. So that would mean things like the child is so anxious, refuses to go to school. The child is feeling so anxious, they're unable to socialize, they're unable to do the things that they're supposed to be doing in everyday functioning. Another way we look at it is the intensity. So a child might not function very well for a few days and be able to maybe not want to go to school for a couple of days, but kind of gets out of it and is able to function afterwards, and you don't see the same intensity in terms of the anxiety. That can happen many times. For example, a student who is starting in grade 7 or a teenager who is moving to a new school may have a few days in which they are very, very anxious and very apprehensive about going to school, and may even refuse to go the first few days. But once they enter school and get used to the new environment, the anxiety dissipates and they're feeling a bit better. That still is considered anxiety that is manageable. It's if the anxiety continues through quite a few weeks, quite a few months, if the anxiety is intense to the point that it's interfering in the daily functioning and is accompanied by behavior such as emotional outbursts, inability to calm down, panic attacks or anxiety attacks, frequent verbalization of how worried and upset they are. All those kind of things do definitely suggest that your child is feeling more than just the normal kind of anxiety response to an event or to a situation and may need support. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit more about teenagers. So we know that adolescence is a unique stage of development. It's when the child is moving from being a child towards adulthood, but is it neither? It's neither here nor there. And this transitional stage involves changes in behavior, but we know that it also involves profound changes in brain development as well. So in terms of behavior, we see that the teen wants to develop new social connections. That's a very big thing. They are searching for a way to fit socially. They want to assert their independence. They want to remove themselves from parental control. They want to find out who they are, explore who they want to become. And they also have to handle things like development of sexual desires or romantic feelings, resisting social pressures, and the need to kind of discover who they want to be and who they are at this level. And sometimes that changes over the teen years. So those are very big things that the kids are experiencing in this time, and they can be quite profound for most kids. In terms of the brain development, this is a whole topic in itself. I'll try and kind of go very quick in a nutshell. We know that the human brain develops throughout childhood a lot and quite profoundly as well. But during adolescence, there's a surge in development, which is associated with puberty. And there are some major changes that take place, including formation of new connections between cells in the brain, between brain regions, reorganization of the network of the brain. And it is often reflected in behavioral changes and the emotional reactions that we see with adolescents. And some of the experiences that teens go to may affect the way the brain will develop or change. And so it's not always the same for every teen, but we know that this is why the experiences that the teen has during adolescence can be very important, and why often in adolescence we have a surge of developmental problems, sometimes that haven't occurred before, and especially mental health problems that we see with teens at that age. What's important to keep in mind is that teens at this age rely less on their logic and their reasoning. They do have good logic and reasoning. They are capable of it, but they rely less on that. They tend to rely more on the emotional impulses and the emotional state that they're feeling, and especially in social contexts. And that's why they tend to be kind of impulsive and reactive. To you, Gerry.
So before we get to you, Gerry, maybe I'll just take a second and ask if there's any questions for Zmira from some of the slides that she mentioned. You can just write a question in the chat. What we're going to do is we'll take one or two right now, and then we'll pass it over to Gerry again, and then we'll have a longer session for questions at the end. But I did want to provide an opportunity if anyone has some burning questions right now to pose it in the chat. So we'll just take a minute and wait and see if anything happens. Perhaps while we're waiting, Zmira, I wanted to ask a question. What advice or insight do you have if you have a child who, for example, isn't separating from their parents or creating their own identity and are still very, very connected?
Okay, so if we're talking about teens, so I'll
sorry, teens, excuse me.
Yes, so we're talking about teens. So that process usually begins during childhood a little bit, and we do see that in grade 5 and 6 already, kids trying to be a little bit separate. That's the preteen years, where they're beginning to separate and feel more comfortable being away from their parents and connecting more to their social group. We do see sometimes kids not going through that process. And sometimes it's related to the personality, the temperament. Kids are very, very different. And to the fact that they may have not had enough experience on how to do that safely. They feel that maybe by separating from their parents, they won't be as safe, they won't feel as secure. There's a feeling of maybe something missing if the parent is not there. And that depends sometimes on how the child is raised, the connection that they have at home, and some of the experience that the child may or may not have had in the past.
Okay, thank you. So I see there's no questions at this moment. So Gerry, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben, for the introduction, and thank you, Zmira, for that eloquent explanation of the variability in the different manifestations of fears and worries, and a little better understanding of what anxiety looks like and the ranges of anxiety we will experience or parents will see in their children. And I think that's one of the most important points is that we're dealing with a group of people who are quite variable. It's not one size fits all in talking about teenagers at all. At one point, we used to talk about adolescence as a period of storm and drama. And that's not true for everybody. There are some teens that go through their developmental tasks just fine and dandy, and it's a seamless transition from childhood to adulthood. And there are some students and some children who struggle a little bit more. And you may find that the variability too is in different, the teenage years are quite long, and the beginning may be more difficult, the middle may be more difficult, or the end when the transition, all those different transition periods at the end of high school, going on to CEGEP, things like that. So we have to be tuned into the host of different situations and different children's dynamics that we might see. The kinds of things that our experience and research tells us that might be challenging for young people, for teenagers, are things like academic demands, either having trouble doing well in school, or wanting to do really well in school, or being indifferent to school. School presents for teens one of the most stressful situations. In a similar manner, demands from parents or relationship with parents. As Zmira pointed out, it's a time where they're developing their autonomy and their independence from, or as Ben is pointing out, where perhaps it's, I remember we were doing a webinar with parents where one parent was saying, they're working and my teenager is always around me, hovering around me, and I have no time to do my work and do my thing. So there's a variety of situations that parents are faced with, but one of the stresses can be the relationship, I emphasize, with parents. In a similar way, one of the most important things that we know is the social interaction. I often see kids that are going from elementary school to high school, and parents are going to open houses and trying to figure out where are they going to go for high school. And the vast majority of the time, it's where are the friends going? So friendships and social interactions are so important and so integral to this period of time. A lot of decisions are made around what their friends want, what their friends are doing. And these days, as you know, social media plays a huge role in the development of teenagers. And at times, the importance that kids give to their friends puts parental or family issues or other responsibilities on the back burner. And that seems to be a big stressor for parents, that friends take a bigger role in their children's lives than what the parents would want them to have. And that's the part about fitting in socially. It's so important that kids can feel that they're part of a group. You know, what we see in schools is there's many different types of groups, and finding a group where you, or a group of friends where you feel comfortable, is integral to the development of the child. But it also can be, as you know yourself, a big stressor and a challenge for many teens. As Zmira pointed out, the going through puberty, the how you feel about yourself, your body image, your appearance plays a tremendous role in what might be stressing students or teenagers, as well as some of the developmental tasks they're faced with. Now, we have to recognize that there's a whole new layer to teen development and developmental tasks with the pandemic. And just want to point out a little bit that what I think you can understand is that the confinement and social distancing plays a role on what we've just described as the stressors and the developmental tasks for teens. They're not able to socialize in person. Even when they're in school, they're really, a student mentioned to me at high school yesterday and was saying it's like a prison here. And it's very regimented, it's very structured. The ability to hang out with their friends and just chill is quite restricted. So their ability to socialize and be with friends, which is, as we said, so important, is made more difficult at this time. Similarly, where we're saying that academics play a significant role or challenge for teen, where they want to do well or they're having trouble in school, the inconsistency, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but for older teens where they're on one day, they're in presence another day, it doesn't have that same predictability. And we know that where we have more routines and predictable kinds of situations, that is one of the reliefs for stress, that where young people are able to, or everybody is able to know what is expected of them. It makes learning much more easy, but it also relieves some of the stress they might be experiencing. Again, the limitations and restriction on peer interaction plays a significant role, as well as all those activities that used to make that kids would look forward going to school for, the sports, the enrichment activities, the extracurricular activities, they're restricted. And before I touch on that last point about being forced to stay home with parents, I was reading some research recently, and they said that right now, 30% of teens are negatively impacted in some way by COVID, by the pandemic. And then they said that another 30% are not impacted negatively. So like for some, the need to be separate from and not wanting to be home with parents can be very challenging. But for others, this time of being home with your children, researchers are indicating that there's a lot of positive that can be understood for that. Quality time with teens, building relationship with teens, with your children in general, among your family. So we can't paint everything with the same brush, but we can understand that when you're trying to be more independent and when you want to hang out with your friends, that at times being forced to stay home with parents may not be ideal, and in some cases may be quite painful for some teens. Moving on to the next part, what we want to do is just remind you about some of the important elements in connecting with children. And I say remind because I think that There's a layer of stress to the pandemic for all of us, where at times when we're faced with certain challenges that our emotional regulation becomes challenged as well. So just some of the points or tips, if I might, to point out that it's really important in connecting with your children to know them. Knowing how they are, their moods, their personality, their temperament, their habits, being able to tune into what motivates them, what engages them, and what irritates them. So if we're trying to connect with teens, to be sensitive to those kinds of things about how they are, and not trying to engage with them when we know it's not going to be a successful encounter. Knowing them also, or tuning into being sensitive to how your kids are, allows you to be sensitive to changes that might be going on with them. And when I say changes, this is one of the most important variables that we look at, or factors, when we're trying to consider, is my child struggling? Is my child in distress? Is when we see changes where they're motivated in school previously and now they're not motivated in school, or they're having a hard time socializing where they would be very physically active and they're not. They're changes in sleep patterns, eating habits, all these things. We need to be, as parents, sensitive to what they're like and see if there's any dramatic or drastic changes, or even subtle changes that might alert us to, oh, something's happening with my child. Let me see what's going on. And all those things are really important to engagement, to connection. I think back to, parents know when is a good time to, when can I actually talk to my kid? For younger kids, it used to be perhaps when you were tucking them at night, saying goodnight to them, that was the time that you could address issues. For others, it was around other times. So it's important to know your child. And if you see things that are concerning for you, it's okay to let them know. You got to tell them, I'm worried, I'm concerned. I can see that you're having a hard time. And it's really important, if they are saying they are having a hard time, it's not to minimize, it's to validate. Through everything that we're going to say today is about validating what they experience. What they experience is real. And whatever emotions they have are their emotions, and we'll look at, Zmira will help us look at, in managing it in a constructive way, whatever they're experiencing. Also letting them know that you want to make things better, not fix things, but make things better. See what we can do to help out a little bit. And that is an important element to bring to the table. I think that we also have to ask, for teenagers, we have to respect their mood and their rhythm. And we have to ask, can I talk to you? Is this a good time? Is there something I can help you with? Is to reach out and try to make those connections with them in a way that respects their independence, just as you would with perhaps your mate or a friend, is to really ask that question, can I help? And to, one of the most important things that I think when we're talking about any sort of difficulty, especially anxiety, is expressing your belief that we'll get through this, that they're capable, that we figure stuff out. I think one of the most brilliant things that we see with the pandemic is that iteration of the ça va bien aller. That's so important in having an optimistic outlook that things will get better. And when we're dealing with teens, they don't have the experience to know that when we are faced with challenges, when the humans are faced with challenges, we do overcome them. All of us have been faced with maybe not something like this, but our own difficulties. So expressing that in your child, that belief that we can overcome this really talks to a child who has anxiety, where we're saying, well, you'll do okay. And remember when you did this before. Finally, the doing for kids, teenagers, doing is really important. To sit down and have a talk with somebody may not be the way to go. But if you're doing something, you're going for a walk, you're shoveling the snow, um, uh, maybe you're snowboarding, maybe you're skiing, or engaging in some physical activity, it's those times that may be easier to have a chat with your son or daughter. Similarly, teaching them something, engaging with them, but how to bake, making cookies, deciding maybe you're going to, once a week, we're going to pick a recipe and make a meal together, or maybe you do yoga, but teach them something and engage with them in that way. And that's a good time when you're doing those sort of things that you find that people are more willing to converse with you. And finally, have them teach you something. Maybe make a TikTok video together, or have them teach you a video game. It's really something to be able to allow them to demonstrate and show their skill to you and teach you something. So those are some of the things that are really important, we feel, in connecting with kids and setting the scene for them to be able to talk to you, and for you to provide them with the kind of strategies that might be helpful for them in dealing with any fears, worries, or anxiety.
Great. Thank you, Gerry. So as you were speaking, we had a few questions that were coming up, and I'd like to pose one or two of them now, and then we'll go back to Zmira, and then we're going to have a longer session for some of these other questions coming in. One question that came in is about her son, who's almost 16 years old, and he has a small peer group, and he's now in a virtual school, but his friends are not. So he has very few social interactions and just a bit of gaming. The question is, how may this affect him in the long run?
Gerry, you want to take that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We talk about worry. There's a lot of researchers that are out there, and a lot of parents too, it seems, that are wondering, how is this going to impact us? And probably it's like 30% are saying that we're going to have increased mental health problems and more stress. And there's another 30, or maybe people like me, that believes that adversity is part of what we are faced with in our lives. That when I work with people, they think that happiness or wellness is something that sort of comes down with the rains, or the snow. It snows upon us, and there's pixie dust that makes us happy. But the truth of the matter, if you look at what makes us happy as individuals or a family or teens, is things that we do. When we work hard at being happy, we get a better result. And I really believe that, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the future will hold, but this being together as families, dealing with things like the floods that we've recently experienced, the ice storms that we've recently experienced, the fires that we've recently experienced. If you look at it, it certainly has impact on people, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a negative impact. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. And here's a second question before we go back to Zmira is, how can you get an introverted teenager to speak about his feelings? And then there's the follow-up question, do video games play a part in creating or augmenting anxiety in teens? So I guess there's two questions there. So let's go with the introverted. How can you get an introverted teenager to speak about his feelings?
It depends who you want him to speak about his feelings, right? Sometimes introvert kids may not speak to their parents, but they might be willing to speak to somebody else. If you are noticing that your teen will just not express his feeling and is not interested in sharing them with you, then maybe somebody else who they can relate to, somebody who they can connect to. It doesn't necessarily have to be a professional psychologist or mental health professional, right? It could be somebody at school, a coach, a teacher that they feel they have some rapport with. It could be anyone who they connect with at a level where they feel that they are able to open up. And it's not always easy to do, but that connection, and Gerry described it very well, when you connect to your children at a different level, when they feel like they are able to come to you with their issues or with their problems, and you are available to help them fix it, that you won't be judgmental, you won't get upset, you won't freak out, you're there to help them, guide them through it. It makes them more able to be able to kind of take that difficult moment of expressing something that might be difficult and be able to actually maybe express it a little bit more with a bit more safety, right? Expressing emotion is not easy. It's not easy. It is particularly not easy for boys. We do raise boys to be less emotionally expressive. The messages that we give, even in 2020, this still occurs. But yes, that's how I would go about it. Try and find someone who's, the person feels connected to at a level that they are willing to open up.
I'd just like to add to that, if I can, quickly, is I think that the kind of talking about feelings requires a certain amount of sophistication, and some kids are good about it. Other kids, it's really not. It's kind of ambiguous, and you ask, "How was your day?" "I don't know." And you get a lot of "I don't know," and maybe it's not about asking those questions. It's not, or even asking questions. If you're concerned about what might be going on with your child, there are there are books, there are images where we can offer them that there's various feelings and emotions, that it's sort of like giving a menu. Instead of saying, "What do you want for supper?" is to propose a few things, looking at some pictogram where you're seeing that kids can feel this way and can feel that way, and even proposing things to if you're worried about your child, to talk in generalities. Kids these days are feeling quite worried about this. Are you feeling worried about this? Or do you know kids who are feeling worried or sad, and explaining what these things might be, because they don't have we think that what they're feeling should be easily within their language and within their ability, and it's not necessarily so.
Thank you, Gerry. Zmira, I'm tempted to let's go to the next slide so that we can have a longer period for question after that.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how to help our teens manage their stress and their anxiety. So managing stress, or learning how to cope with stress, or just general coping skills, is something that does need to be learned. It does require learning. And if a child, or actually a teen, is experiencing intense stress or worry, and no one has ever taught them how to deal with it, they're likely not to do so well, or do less well than someone who has the experience. And most of the time, the go-to strategies when you don't know what to do is to avoid, is to try and get away from the stressful situation, which is not a very good coping strategy. So learning how to cope really needs to start in childhood. It doesn't start when you turn 12 or 13. And many kids do have many coping strategies that they develop over time, and may be able to cope pretty well in many situations. But we have to remember sometimes the teen years can be particularly challenging for kids, and particularly overwhelming in terms of stress and worry and experience of new stressful situations that they have never encountered before. And that may require extra kind of skills, or further learning, or further support in order to know what to do in these situations. And there are also another level involved in the stress that the kids are feeling during teens, that is related to how they are viewed by others. So that level of stress is usually makes it more difficult to employ some of the other coping strategies that they've had before. And now let's not forget that kids are very unique and very different, and different kids may handle stress in different ways. And there's not only one way or one kind of strategy to handle stress. And sometimes they have actual coping strategies that you can discover as you work with them. And I'm going to go over sort of, when I talk to parents about how to help their kids, I usually talk about 3 broad areas that I want parents to keep in mind. So the first one is showing empathy, validating. I think Gerry mentioned that. And that comes in together with everything really that Gerry said, that connection that you have with your child, that ability to relate to them, that they feel like they can open up to you. That really is an essential part in your ability to be able to approach them and help them. Saying things like, I understand this is difficult for you. I can see that you're struggling here. And the message is it's just okay to feel stressed, that what they're feeling is normal, that it's not unusual. There's nothing wrong with them because they're feeling this worry or this apprehension. I'm saying I'm ready to listen. I'm ready to listen and support. And I do believe in most cases with an open, a caring, a calm approach, parents will likely find it easier to have to communicate with their teens, and the teens will find it easier to approach their parents. And when the parents know that they can count on you, then they're more likely to share. So that's one very broad area that I emphasize when you're approaching your child in any situation, but particularly when they're stressed. The other area is sort of what to avoid doing. So in terms of over-involvement, if you are directing them and forcing them to do certain things that you feel like they need to already do, because this is expected of them and they're not ready to do it and they're feeling the anxiety, that's not going to help them. Same with over-reassurance. I think I emphasized that quite a bit last time. The reassurance is very reinforcing. It makes them feel better, but then they become very dependent on it and they don't know how to reassure themselves or face their fears on their own. And things like reinforcing their avoidance and dependence. So if your child is very stressed about going to school and you allow them to stay home, well, then you're reinforcing their avoidance. You may do that because you feel sorry for them. They're so upset, they're so distressed, and maybe you just don't know what to do. But in a sense, that reinforces the anxiety, because avoidance always creates more anxiety the next day when they have to come to school. In terms of reinforcing dependence, that's the kind of thing that we do when we are trying to help our kids too much, trying to fix it for them too much. So they're having difficulty tackling their homework or their academics, and we literally go and practically, guide them step by step on how to do it, rather than let them sort of feel what it means to put the effort, to feel the stress of having to deal with it, and offer them support at the same time. It's a different level of support, actually, in terms of how you approach the help that you give your child. So we have to find a balance between that. So that's the other area that I really emphasize a lot. And the last area is how to problem solve. And that is the biggest thing. And I even tell the teens that I work with, if you can learn to problem solve and to cope through challenges in life, it'll serve you more than anything that you learn in school. So that might not be the message that teachers like to hear. Often I tell the students, as a psychologist, I think it's more important than math and science and all the other stuff, because if you're able to problem solve and cope, you will be able to learn the difficult math and difficult science eventually. So the first thing I would want to ask my teen, if I feel like they're worried or stressed, is try to define what is going on. What is it that they're going through? What is the problem that they're feeling at that moment? What is the worry? And then look and see if they can control it. Is it something that we can change? Is it something that we can do something about, or it's something that we have no control over? such as pandemics, right? A lot of the stresses that teens are feeling right now and the problems that they're experiencing are to do with the pandemic, and we don't have any way to change that at this time. Hopefully in the next few months, but right now this is the reality of our lives, and it's a reality of all our lives too. So if we can't control a situation, then that I would help them to how to deal with that, to accept it, to how do you deal with something that's not going your way and you can't do anything about it? How do you tolerate it? How do you bear it? And still able to be okay, still able to move on and go to school and do the best you can and have some fun. Those are very important things to guide kids with. And when I say guide, this is where I mean have them brainstorm what can they do to help themselves. You may have the answers and you may want to direct them to the right answer and reassure them that they can do it. But really the best way to do it is to help them figure it out themselves. Maybe sometimes you have to give them some ideas and guide them through some of the possibilities. But at the end of the day, you really want them to be able to think for themselves and figure out what works for them, because things may work for one child and may not work for another. So by saying things like, what do you think you can do about this situation? What would help you? If there was something I could do to help you, what can I do to help you? If there was something that you could change in the situation to make yourself feel better, what would you do to make yourself feel better? So those are kind of guiding questions that I would use, rather than just tell them, oh, why don't you just do X or Y? So these are for situations. So learning how to cope and tolerate situations you can't control is one area. And then what happens when we can change something? So maybe your teen is very stressed about all the work that they're being given in school, and there's so much to do, and they're feeling overwhelmed by how they're going to get it all done. And they feel that they're not going to get it all done. But the reality is they probably can find a way to get most of it done. And that's where you've problem solved towards that role. What can you do to help yourself figure out a way to get all this work done? Do you need to get more organized? Do you need some help maybe from someone to understand the subject matter? Do you need to get started with maybe help to get started? Do you need to be encouraged and maybe structured a little bit at home? So again, it's them figuring out what will help them get through the problem that they're experiencing. Often I ask kids to look to other situations that may have been similar to what they've been through. So what have you done in the past that helped? You know, last year you also had these, I remember you had a big project, you were very overwhelmed, and then you kind of got over it and you ended up handing in the project and you actually ended up doing well. Do you remember what you did that helped you get to that point, that you were able to do so well? To have them access some of their own skills. And I remember Gerry just mentioned it, in fact, saying that we have to give kids credit that they can help themselves. We have to show them that we do believe that they're, with guidance and support, they are able to stand on their own 2 feet and figure out how to help and how to deal with the challenges that they're experiencing. The fourth part is really related to problem solving, because when I say taking action, is that sometimes the anxiety, the stress, the worry can be paralyzing. And often we see kids who can't get going because they're so frozen by the fear of doing what it is that they're faced with. But sometimes just taking a small step towards it is the beginning of conquering that fear or conquering that difficulty that you're experiencing. And one of the things that I often ask kids, and I actually had a teen like that today in my office, who I asked them this question: what is the smallest step that you can take right now to solve this, towards doing this particular situation or problem? The smallest, tiniest step that you are sure that you will be able to be successful with. So in this case, it was a teen who needed to go and speak to his teacher about something that was bothering him. And there was just so much anxiety around that. And the only step that he could do was to be able to imagine it in his head. that he's speaking to his teacher. He still was not ready to actually go and face the teacher, but saying it in his head was a very, very small step. And sometimes that is the smallest step that somebody can take, just imagining doing the difficult situation that they have to face. With a student who doesn't want to go to school, a small step could be just driving by the school, maybe stopping in the car, getting out, looking at the building, getting back in the car and driving home. And that would be the first step. And maybe the second step would be driving by the school, getting up and maybe walking to the door and then coming back into the car. And so forth and so on, gradually until you make it to the level that you want to, or to the point where you're actually able to get into school and function. But even in everyday situations, sometimes it's very hard for us to get started. I know even in everyday activities, we're tired, we're not very motivated. A lot of times teens tell me, I'm just not motivated. This is so boring. This is so, useless. Why are we doing this? And sometimes we're just guiding them to do one little thing, just write one line and then see where it goes. Just write the title. That's the smallest step you can take, then take that step. So that's another way to help kids problem solve and get going and be able to move forward with their worries or anxieties. So those are in a nutshell, the kind of things that I would recommend.
Great, thank you very much. So here's a question which you really just touched upon when you were speaking, but I did want to read it and give you a chance to respond if there's one or two other tips. The person writes, our daughter's anxiety is causing her to not want to go to school, and we've now a medical note for her to attend half days and transition to full days. Some days she refuses to go. What strategies can we use to get her to school? We're concerned that the more she stays home, the more difficult it will be to go back.
Absolutely.
So I touched upon that, but go ahead.
Yes, the avoidance, the more you avoid, the more you're less likely to be conquering and facing your anxiety, because that anxiety feeling that the person is feeling about whatever it is that they have to do becomes reinforced by not doing it. And by facing it, you're slightly feeling a little bit better about it, and you're able to deal with the discomfort that it creates when you're facing it. And then slowly that discomfort gets less and less until you're able to face it. In a situation like that, I would ask myself that maybe half days was too much for her. Maybe she should have started with one period and worked her way slowly towards a full day. Maybe the step was too difficult, or maybe there is something else that will allow her to be in school every day. Maybe it's not going directly to class in the morning. Maybe it's connecting with somebody in school before she goes to class, or having the possibility to take a break during the day if she feels overwhelmed to go somewhere safe in the school. So there's a variety of things that we do suggest when in schools for teens. And what I would recommend is for the parent to speak to the school and see what is available, what are they able to accommodate this young girl with, and do we have to maybe change a little bit this. It's a good plan to start with half days, but maybe we can tweak the plan a little bit more and have other supports that would help the student face this anxiety producing activity, which is for her is going to school.
If I might, Ben, for that parent who asked the question, as Zmira is saying there at the end, I'm hoping that they have support for trying to figure this out. The kinds of things that we're talking about have been in general more worry and anxious kids, but when you're dealing with what sounds like a real problematic anxiety disorder, I'm hoping that there's professionals that are supporting the parents, that they're not alone in trying to figure out what's the best way to do it, that there's a collaborative process that also includes, as Zmira says, the school. This, for you as a parent, this may be your one or two only cases or incidents of having to deal with this, but this is not unfamiliar to us in schools. It's not unfamiliar to the mental health professionals. And what really, it is not an easy situation, but it's one that we can support you and collaborate with you to figure out what's the right blend of limiting avoidance, increasing cooperation, helping people feel comfortable with making those baby steps to advance further and further. And anxiety is one of the, has the best prediction of positive outcomes. So they should know that this is something that in a collaborative approach that we can manage and make things much better.
Great, thank you very much. I wanted to ask the question, do video games play a part in creating or augmenting anxiety in teens? So as we know, many teens play video games. Do video games play a part in creating more anxiety?
I would say that it actually doesn't, because a lot of the teens that I speak to, it's a way of reducing their anxiety. In fact, sometimes that is the problem that we're facing with some teens, that because the video games are reducing their anxiety and they feel it's a way to disconnect from everything that is producing anxiety and escape to the world of the gaming, that they spend way too much time doing that and not facing the realities of the things they need to face. And often, in addition to that, they lose sleep, and then they're even more anxious about the things that are causing them anxiety the next day because they're tired and sleep deprived. There is obviously a situation where kids may be playing violent games that may create anxiety in them. That would be cases that maybe need to be addressed specifically. But as a whole, the video game in itself is not an anxiety producing problem. It might be very individual for some kids, though.
But as Zmira is pointing out, that it can be a retreat, can be an avoidance, overindulgence, and becoming obsessed with video games is a phenomena that we need to be careful about. And we would look at more adaptive forms of coping where you could lose yourself. Like, it's important to be able to sort of go with the flow, where you're doing something where you're not thinking, obsessing about what your worries are, but you can just let go. Video games offers that to young people, but there may be other things like exercise and movement that also can do that.
Thank you. So here's a question that I think goes back to what Gerry was presenting around ways we can speak to our teenagers. The question is, what do you do when the teen feels attacked by your concern?
Take that, Gerry?
Sure. I think that it's really important to address what is the perception of the individual. And at times, I think that teens challenge parents too. There's it's sort of like, if you love me, then you'll know how to ask the proper question. If you love me, if you really are a good parent, then you'll know how to soothe me, how to support me. And at times the kids push our buttons and test us to, now's not a good time. That's not the way. Why are you doing this? Why are you, my kids will say, why are you psychologizing me? Or why are you talking to me like that? And I think that it's, when we get that, it's kids are pushing us away. And it's at those times that when we get pushed away, we have to resist the impulse to be angry and to override that impulse and try to find some way to pull them closer, to express that I am concerned about you. Maybe now is not a good time, but I want to talk about it. I want to do something about it a little bit later.
Yeah. What kids need the most during adolescence is calm parents who do not get emotional when they get emotional. And when they're upset and they don't want to engage, that's okay. Stay calm, find another way to deal with it, and don't take it personally. There's no reason to take it personally. This often happens to all of us as parents.
Thank you. So this will probably be the last question. The question is, how do you encourage your teen to get help when their anxiety is affecting their lives, but don't want to talk to anyone about it?
Mm-hmm. when they not talk to the parents or not talk to anyone?
My impression is not wanting to talk to anyone about it.
Mhm. That's a tough one. It's a very, very difficult one because, and I've experienced that myself, sometimes we have a student who we know is struggling with anxiety, the parents want help and the teen refuses. Again, it's sometimes finding the right way and the right time to approach the teen. Maybe say to the teen something like, why don't you give it a chance? Why don't you just go and try once to speak to someone? No commitments. You have nothing to lose, right? It's only one conversation. And sometimes I actually say that we have to let the teen sometimes experience a lot of distress before they're ready to engage. Sometimes they're so resistant to engaging that we sort of have to step back, and then things do become so difficult, and then they will in themselves recognize that they need the help. But I would try by kind of making them understand that they are not committing to anything if they just go and talk to someone once. That's how we kind of do it sometimes. Just go speak to this person once and see how that goes.
So I'm of two minds, or maybe even more, but I feel like depending upon the severity of the situation, that as a parent, we have a responsibility to be authoritative. If a child is not eating properly, sleeping properly, has some sort of physical malaise, it's about this is what needs to be done. And I tend to be, you're going to speak to somebody, and we'll try to find, and maybe I'll give choices around. Do you want to speak to Zmira or you want to speak to Gerry? Pick your poison. That's one thing. The other thing is that nobody is something all the time. There's, like, as I say, I'm of a couple of minds on this. It's, there's a part of each person that wants help. And it's being able to tap into those times when they are struggling, when they do recognize that they need help, there's a little crack in that wall of that hard wall of leave me alone and pushing you away, that you need to get in there a little bit, and where there's a little bit of an opening to use those little openings of that desire for things to get better, and the encouragement, your belief that if you speak to Zmira, things will get better and she can help you. And I believe that, and I want you to try.
Great. Thank you very much. Gerry, I want to invite you to maybe go to one of the last slides so we can just talk about what people can do if they have more questions. Do you want to just speak about the website?
Yeah, this is the Center of Excellence is there to support the educational system. It's a Ministry of Education mandated resource to point out to, or to present to schools and educators and parents best practices in mental health, how to promote positive mental health. That is, you see the CEMH.LBPSB.QC.ca is our website. And if you go to our website, there's many infographics and links to things about anxiety. We see there on one hand, it says understanding mental health. You can click on that and it'll give you a list of things like depression, anxiety, self-injury. And within there, you can find resources that are available to you to help your child with whether it's anxiety or depression or school success, things of that nature.
Great, thank you. So as we start wrapping up, I want to just note that we will be sending you a PDF of the presentation, as well some information on upcoming webinars. Gerry, there's one more slide, if I'm not mistaken.
There were just slides that were reviewing what we had talked about today, and you'll get a copy of that so you can just review it. It's really a tip sheet to help you understand that. And I think that one of the things that we're emphasizing is at this point in time, it's really dealing with fears and worries. It's about being cautious. It's not to vilify being worried. That if you're worried, it's a good indication that you'll be careful, whereas the other extreme is being irresponsible and carefree. That's not good either. In our lives, we have to have ourselves a certain amount of balance, as well as teaching our children to have that balance, not to be at the extremes, but somewhere in the middle.
I just want to add one more thing, is that the way you as parents model how you deal with your own worries and your own anxieties is often the best lesson you can give your children. You don't have to hide your anxieties and your worries from them. Sometimes you need to edit a little bit, but most of the time, the way you handle them, when you show them how you're going through something, is the best lesson that they can have.
Great, thank you very much. So with that, I'd like to thank Zmira and Gerry very much for taking the time to prepare this presentation and share with all of these parents and adults around the province of Quebec.